I can still picture the exact moment my heart cracked. It was a Tuesday afternoon, just after lunchtime, and I was standing in my father's study, trembling with excitement. I'd worked up the courage to show him my newest invention and idea that had been living in my mind for years. I was so proud I could burst. He seemed to listen closely, lips pursed in concentration, and that tiny spark of hope in me grew bigger by the second. I didn't see any danger in sharing my dream with him. My father had always been the person I looked up to most in the world. He was powerful, respected, and so commanding that everyone around him seemed to fade into his shadow. As I poured out my heart, I believed foolishly that he wanted the best for me. That belief was my first mistake. I was 23 and fresh out of college, armed with a degree in mechanical engineering and a head overflowing with prototypes I sketched late at night. My father, Marcus Henderson, had a reputation as a shrewd businessman. He was known for investing in bold tech startups and flipping them for huge returns. My plan was to create my own line of home gadgets, starting with a device that streamlined cooking tasks. It was a sleek kitchen helper that could chop, stir, and measure with a single voice command. I'd tinkered with it for months using leftover parts from my robotics club. I named it the Prep Buddy, and every time I tested it in my tiny workshop, I found myself grinning like a fool. It felt like something that could change how people cooked forever. But instead of waiting to present it to an investor or a random board of directors, I chose to show it to Dad first. I wanted him to be proud. I wanted him to see that his daughter had inherited a bit of that legendary business instinct. At first, he just ran his fingers over the smooth sides of my device, eyebrows drawn together. Then, out of nowhere, he broke into a huge smile and gave me the biggest hug. My entire body floated with relief. He told me the design was brilliant, that I was onto something big. He said if I played my cards right, I'd own the next wave of domestic tech. In that moment, it felt like the best day of my life. I couldn't stop smiling as I helped him pack the prototype back in its box. He told me to leave it with him for a few days so he could look into manufacturing possibilities and approach some of his contacts on my behalf. My father said he wanted to personally invest in me. I was ecstatic. He even offered to introduce me to some of his best patent lawyers to make sure my concept stayed protected. With stars in my eyes, I agreed to everything he suggested. When I look back at that memory, I echo at how naive I was. If only I had realized the absolute power my father's name held, or how easy it would be for him to twist everything around. 1 month slipped by. He kept saying things were on schedule, that he was meeting with potential manufacturers. Then 2 months passed. Then 3. And I started feeling uneasy. My father began dodging my questions and refusing to show me any paperwork. Every time I asked for updates, he'd pat my head like I was a clueless child. "Trust me," he'd say. "I want this to succeed as much as you do." But the more I pressed, the more distant and secretive he became. He stopped letting me into his home office. He acted like his phone calls were top secret, hurrying away whenever I walked by. My gut told me something was wrong, but I couldn't imagine in my father, of all people, betraying me. So I held back my doubts, hoping it was just typical business hush-hush. I never expected him to register my invention under his own name. I learned the truth in the worst possible way. Late one night, I heard my mom on the phone with one of her friends. She wasn't sure I was within earshot. She whispered that Marcus had just secured a new patentsome hot new device that would make millions in the cooking industry. I felt like the wind was knocked out of me. My mind raced. Was she really talking about my prep buddy? A rush of anxiety took hold. I barged into his office the next morning, shaking inside, and demanded to see the documents. His face went ice cold. There was a flicker of shock that I had the guts to confront him so directly, but then it vanished behind a thin-lipped smile. He slipped a stack of folders out of his desk drawer and spread them across the table. My heart sank as I saw the official stamps and the patent number. Marcus Henderson was clearly listed as the sole inventor, while I was typed in, further down, as a consultant. A consultant. I'm not sure how long I stood there before my legs regained strength. My hands started shaking in pure rage. I said, "This was my idea. Dad. How can you do this?" He just shrugged, saying it was his resources, his capital, and his negotiations that made it feasible. He claimed I'd have no clue how to bring it to market without his guidance. It was better for everyone if he took ownership. He insisted the only fair arrangement would be for him to give me a small salary. As a helper on the project, they said he might give me a bonus if the product sold well. Tears blurred my vision, but my voice stayed steady. "You're stealing from me," I said. That was the hardest sentence I'd ever spoken to him. He flashed me this cold little smile, almost pitying. "You're too emotional," he replied, shaking his head. "If you walk away now, I might let you back in once things settle. Otherwise, I have no problem cutting you out completely." Something inside me snapped. Maybe that was the first time I ever truly saw him as just another greedy businessman. He no longer felt like my father, the dad who read bedtime stories and taught me how to ride a bike. That person vanished, replaced by a man who saw my brilliance as an easy gold mine to claim. I fled that office, tears streaming down my cheeks. But as soon as I was alone in my car, with the seatbelt on and the engine running, an odd chill spread through my chest. Beneath the shock and pain was a spark of determination. I thought, he has no right to do this. He might have more power and resources, but the idea is mine. I told myself that I wouldn't back down. It was time I learned how to fight. I wish I could say I crafted a flawless plan from the start, but the truth is I stumbled around in the dark for a while, blindly flipping through patent law basics online. I spent late nights reading about how to challenge a fraudulent patent or prove rightful ownership. My father was cunning, though. He'd planned everything meticulously, forging documents and evidence that placed him in the role of inventor. On paper, it looked like I was just another helper who typed up notes. You can't imagine how low that made me feel. But something in me refused to quit, and so I started thinking about a more creative approach. My father, well, he thrived on controlling every detail of a business. He had a tight circle of attorneys, accountants, and industry experts who jumped at his commands. He was unstoppable if you challenged him head-on, but I realized something important. If you can't fight your opponent's resources, you can try to be invisible until it's too late for them to respond. That's how the idea of forming my own shell company took root. I remember reading about how large corporations sometimes used shell companies to buy land or register patents quietly, without drawing attention. The concept fascinated me. If I could quietly file improvements to my original invention under a secret business name, I might beat him at his own game. The plan was risky. I'd never formed a corporation before, let alone hidden behind a complicated business structure. But the core principle was simple. I'd create a new, upgraded version of Prep Buddy with enhancements only I could conceive. Then I'd file a fresh patent under a shell company's name, with my real identity buried behind layers of paperwork. If I succeeded, I could publicly reveal it only once the application was approved, ensuring the courts would see me as the rightful inventor of that improved design. In the meantime, Dad would keep parading around with his stolen blueprint, not realizing I had a more advanced prototype in the works. My father always bragged about being the best strategist in the room, but he'd never dealt with an enemy who knew him from the inside. That advantage was my secret weapon. I set up a small team, just 3 people I trusted with my life. First was my college friend Nia, a genius with business filings and confidentiality. She helped me incorporate a blank slate company that we named Nova Spark Innovations. It looked like any random tech startup you'd find in a bustling city's registry, but on the back end, it was all me. Second was my old roommate, Zach, who specialized in coding and robotics. He had a day job designing automated manufacturing lines, and he was willing to sign a strict non-disclosure agreement to help me refine the Prep Buddy design. Finally, I recruited a freelance patent attorney named Rosanna, who'd once helped me with a minor licensing issue. She hated big corporate bullies. When I told her everything, she eagerly signed on to keep my identity hidden until the crucial moment. Those first weeks were intense. Every morning, I'd show up at Dad's company to do my consultant duties, which mostly involved him bossing me around, forcing me to sign documents, or making coffee for his staff, while he paraded the so-called invention. At night, I'd sneak back to the little workshop I set up in my friend's garage, working with Zach to build a brand new prototype. We added advanced sensors so it could measure precise weight. We gave it a self-clean feature. We put in a voice command library that recognized multiple accents. It became so much better than my original model that it made me proud all over again. Dad was busy trying to sell the old version. He had no clue that I was perfecting the next generation behind his back. Living a double life was exhausting. Sometimes Dad would call me late in the evening to show off some progress, basically telling me how manufacturing deals were shaping up. I'd try to sound thrilled, while in reality, my father's news filled me with dread. If he launched his stolen product before I got my new patent filed, it would be harder to claim my rightful ownership. Then I'd have to swallow all the bitterness, go back to my workshop, and keep pushing. Zach was my rock. He'd brew us cups of strong tea, at coxia. As I tested each function of the new design, we messed up a lot. Parts overheated, wires shorted, code got buggy. But each time we fixed a problem, I felt a fresh wave of hope. This was mine. No one could claim this but me. Rosanna was brilliant at weaving through the patent system. She filed the documents for NovaSpark innovations in small, strategic increments, labeling certain claims as trade secrets, so no prying eyes could piece it all together. By the time we submitted the final patent application, we had over 100 pages of technical details, diagrams, and logs showing how every step of this improved Prep Buddy was conceptualized by authorized representatives of NovaSpark. Not once was my name, or my father's, mentioned. The secrecy was nerve-wracking. If any detail leaked, Dad might have found out, and his unstoppable legal machine could have crushed me before the final reveal. We moved carefully, speaking in code words, using encrypted email addresses. It felt like living in a spy movie, except the threat was real and heartbreakingly personal. Then, about 6 months into this operation, Dad made a public announcement that nearly gave me a panic attack. He scheduled a huge product unveiling for the old Prep Buddy design, inviting journalists, tech bloggers, and potential retailers to a flashy event. He booked a sleek event space downtown, hired a marketing team, and even teased the product as the next frontier in kitchen automation. I felt sick. If the world embraced Dad's stolen invention before I could prove I was the real mind behind it, would they even believe me later? My best chance was to keep quiet, trust the process, and wait until my father's claims were irreversibly overshadowed by my improved patent. But the wait was agonizing. I forced myself to attend his big unveiling. I tried to keep my face neutral, though inside I wanted to scream every time he opened his mouth to brag about how he'd dreamed this up to help busy families. The device was basically my original prototype, with some cosmetic changes. Press photos showed him holding it in both hands like a proud father. His staff introduced me only as an assistant who helped with background research. Several times during the event, Dad glanced my way with a condescending grin, as if to say, Look how powerful I am. My fingernails dug into my palms so hard I nearly drew blood, but I faked a polite smile. Once we made eye contact, and I saw the smugness in his eyes. At that moment, all I could think was, "You have no idea that I'm about to bury you." What kept me going was the knowledge that my father was behind the times. My new version of Prep Buddy was miles ahead. The moment I got approval and in the best scenario, an official patent, I planned to launch a new brand reveal under Nova Spark Innovations. If my father tried to claim the product was his, I'd have a trove of evidence showing the improved features were developed exclusively by Nova Spark, with timestamps, code repositories, and every possible shred of proof. Dad wouldn't just be overshadowed, he'd be exposed as a fraud. The idea of seeing his smug grin wiped off his face was almost too delicious to handle. Finally, after months of hush-hush calls with Rosanna, I got the message I'd been praying for. Our patent was looking solid, and the examiners hadn't found prior art that invalidated our claims. We were one step away from official approval. That was the green light. I arranged a discreet product testing demonstration with a small group of potential investors who had quietly reached out to Nova Spark. We met in a borrowed conference room in a neighboring city, so no word would leak to my father's circle. I let Zach handle the presentation. He walked them through each step of the new device, from voice activation to cleanup. The investors were wide-eyed. One of them even said, "This is leaps beyond anything we've seen on the market." My heart soared. We secured early commitments from half of them right on the spot. I knew my father had a huge board meeting scheduled for the next week to finalize manufacturing deals, so I played my big hand. I asked Rosanna to file an official notice that there was a competing patent from Nova Spark Innovations that invalidated some of the claims my father had used in his patent. Our complaint was submitted directly to the relevant legal channels, including the Patent Office. We also triggered a request for a re-examination stating we had reason to believe my father's original patent was incomplete or fraudulent. The complaint included details of our advanced version, along with the technology logs that proved we had done the development ourselves. Once that legal grenade dropped, my father's camp was forced to respond, or risk having everything they'd built crumble. Dad's reaction was volcanic. That night, he barged into my apartment building, banging on my door like a madman. When I opened it, he practically lunged at me, demanding to know what the heck was going on. He was breathless, raging about how some unknown startup had challenged his patent. He must have suspected I was involved, but he had no proof, because on paper, my name was nowhere to be seen. I just shrugged and looked baffled. I told him, "I have no idea, Dad. Maybe they're just better innovators." The look of pure fury in his eyes was terrifying. He accused me of lying, but I reminded him that I'd been demoted to a simple helper in his business. I had no power to challenge him. Dad stumped away, fists clenched at his sides, cursing under his breath. Days later, he tried to push back his big manufacturing deal, but the partner threatened to pull out if he couldn't prove his patent was valid. My father's lawyers scrambled to prepare a defense, but they were blindsided by the sophistication of our approach. Every time they tried to argue that the new design was basically the same invention, we'd produce evidence that Nova Spark's version had advanced features Dad's patent never mentioned. The tension spilled into official legal documents, nasty phone calls, and endless demands for depositions. Still, he had no clue that Nova Spark was me. I bided my time, trusting Rosanna, and letting the shell company handle all official statements. Behind the scenes, Dad's allies began to whisper that maybe he had overstepped. Investors pulled out. The manufacturing line he'd been counting on threatened to switch sides because they were more excited about the advanced version. I heard gossip around the office that Dad was in meltdown mode, lashing out at everyone. One day, I even found him in his office, tossing around his papers. He turned to me with pure venom and said, "You think you're clever, but you're nothing without me." I stared back, and for one fleeting second, I almost confessed. I almost told him the truth, that I was the force behind Nova Spark, that I was the one who'd stolen the spotlight. Instead, I just looked at him blankly and said, "We'll see." The final showdown came when the patent office scheduled a hearing to decide whether Dad's patent should be invalidated. They also wanted to know if Nova Spark's design was truly distinct and if it merited a separate, valid patent. My father's arrogance led him to claim that the new device was basically a direct copy of his own. He insisted he was the original and rightful inventor. However, the hearing allowed each side to present evidence. My father strode in with a whole team of lawyers in sharp suits. On the other side sat a single lawyer from Nova Spark Rosenand, a couple of men who Dad assumed were her tech staff. I was nowhere to be seen. I'd chosen to watch from a side room, waiting for the right moment. Rosanna calmly explained how Nova Spark's Prep Buddy took the basic idea of an automated cooking tool and elevated it with new, patentable features. She provided extensive logs of development progress, typed daily notes, code commit histories, and design changes. The timestamps showed work going back to just after Dad took my original device. Each log entry was verified by an outside notary service. Dad's lawyers tried to pick holes, but they looked foolish because the evidence was so thorough. They had no clue that I had real-time knowledge of Dad's stolen blueprint and used it as a stepping stone to build something superior. Then came the bombshell. Rosanna revealed that the actual inventor behind Nova Spark was ready to provide sworn testimony. My father's eyes flickered with confusion. Who could it be? At that cue, I walked into the hearing room, my heart pounding so loud it nearly deafened me. The expression on Dad's face was unforgettable. He looked like he'd been punched in the gut. In a quivering voice, he snarled, "You." Then he froze, uncertain how to finish. My attorney introduced me formally as the lead engineer behind the new design, with full records to prove my authorship. I lifted my chin, faced the board, and began my testimony. I explained how I was the original creator of the concept, how my father had forced me to hand it over, how he manipulated paperwork. I laid out the timeline step by step, showing that while I had indeed started with the initial concept, I had quickly realized that I needed to protect myself from him. The final version was drastically more advanced, making the older design nearly obsolete. Rosanna showed the board how Dad's patent was riddled with vague descriptions, incomplete diagrams, and no mention of the advanced components. It was my baby, from start to finish. My father's eyes brimmed with rage and panic. He tried to shout accusations, claiming I was ungrateful or that I was lying to sabotage him. But the hearing's moderators demanded that he show proper evidence. He had none. His lawyers tried to argue that the design logs might be forged, but they found nothing to back that up. They had no idea we had used time-stamped digital repositories and third-party notaries. Watching Dad's carefully built empire of lies unravel before the board felt like some strange out-of-body experience. My heart hammered, but I kept reminding myself to breathe, to stay calm, to trust the truth. In the end, the patent office recommended canceling my father's patent and granting Nova Spark's application. The official ruling arrived weeks later, but the hearing's direction was clear. My father left that day in a silent fury, ignoring everyone around him. Not long after, news began circulating that Henderson Techa key venture under his control was dropping in value. Investors were wary of placing money in a company whose founder had been caught lying about an invention. Word spread through the business community like wildfire. Suddenly, Dad wasn't the brilliant entrepreneur everyone respected. He became a cautionary tale. For me, the best part wasn't watching him lose money, though that was a satisfying side effect. What truly mattered was stepping out from his shadow, proving that I was always more than a helper. I gave official interviews on behalf of Nova Spark, explaining my vision for user-friendly household robots. People seemed to love my story, an ambitious young female engineer taking on a giant. My father tried to do damage control, releasing a statement that he had always wanted to support his daughter's work. But nobody believed him. He was the man who got exposed by his own kid. The man who tried to claim her glory. My mother called me in tears, begging me to patch things up. She said my father wasn't eating or sleeping properly. He was drowning in lawsuits and had lost a major chunk of his fortune. She wanted me to forgive him, or at least talk to him. But I wasn't ready. My father had taught me a harsh lesson. Trust has to be earned, not forced by guilt. The old me might have caved, but after everything I went through, I knew I deserved to protect my heart. I told Mom, calmly, that I'd consider speaking with him when he finally owned up to what he did, not just to me, but publicly. Until then, I had a company of my own to run. When the official patent certificate arrived for my improved prep buddy, I framed it. I hung it in my new office at Nova Spark's modest headquarters, which was really just 2 rented floors in a local tech park. It's a constant reminder of what I fought for. The shell company I once built in secret became my real business, and interest in my device soared. We secured contracts with major kitchenware brands, each one more exciting than the last. My father tried to sue for partial ownership, claiming the new design wouldn't exist without his initial help, but the courts dismissed his case. The evidence was overwhelming that I was the true innovator, and he had no legal claim. A part of me felt sadness, wishing it hadn't come to this, but the rest of me felt strong, like I finally saw my father without the pedestal I'd put him on. He was just a bitter man who'd stolen from his daughter, convinced she was too weak to stop him. That day I testified against him was the day I found my own voice. Our relationship might never be the same, but perhaps that's for the best. Now, as I stand in my lab, testing the latest Prep Buddy improvements, I sometimes recall the day I first told Dad about my idea. I remember the raw excitement and that feeling of being on the edge of something big. I've regained that spark, but this time, it doesn't revolve around whether my father approves. I'm on my own path, designing new devices for everyday life, heading a small but passionate team that believes in my vision. Each day we push forward, refining code, brainstorming new features, shipping prototypes. We have partnerships lined up that fill me with a sense of hope I once thought I'd never feel again. As for my father, I've heard rumors he's gone into semi-retirement, trying to salvage what's left of his reputation. Some say he's taken to traveling, speaking at small conferences about entrepreneurial mistakes as a lesson. Maybe, in time, we'll find a way to speak as family again, but that day is far off. I won't lie, sometimes my chest tightens with guilt. I wonder if I went too far by stripping away his illusions so completely. Yet I also know the path he chose. If he hadn't tried to crush me, I would have happily shared the spotlight. I had offered him a place by my side, and he chose to steal and deceive instead. At night, when I lock up the office, I often pause in front of that framed patent, running my fingers over the official seal. The irony isn't lost on me. I overcame my father's betrayal by using the tools he taught me: strategic planning, ruthless secrecy, unstoppable determination, but I refused to use them the way he did, destroying others in my path. I simply reclaimed what was mine. I don't know what the future holds, but I've learned a powerful lesson. People who belittle you can be dangerous, especially if they're family. Maybe it hurts more when it's your own father, but it forced me to sharpen my wits and stand up for myself. And in the end, I won. I look at the Prep Buddy, shining under my lab lights, and feel a surge of pride. This device represents my strength, my dreams, my unwavering refusal to be swept aside. Sure, Dad once called me a mere helper, but it turns out he was wrong. I'm the mastermind, and that's something no one can ever take away again.